The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was ready to cross, but James Rivera could feel his heart hammering against his ribs as he looked into William Jones's eyes. They were sitting on the familiar couch in their shared apartment, the same spot where they had navigated countless conversations about everything and nothing. But this moment felt different, electric, dangerous. William's hand was still resting on James's knee from where he had placed it moments before, his thumb tracing absent circles through the fabric of James's jeans. The touch sent sparks up James's spine, a sensation he had been trying to ignore for months now, maybe years. "I want to start over," William had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to do it right this time." James felt the world tilt on its axis. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through their living room window caught the golden flecks in William's brown eyes, and for a moment James forgot how to breathe. This was the moment he had dreamed about and feared in equal measure. The moment when everything between them would either shatter completely or transform into something beautiful and terrifying. But how did we get here, James wondered, his mind racing back through the labyrinth of their friendship, trying to trace the path that had led them to this precipice. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is about to take you on an emotional roller coaster that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and friendship. To understand how they arrived at this moment, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when James Rivera first met William Jones in their freshman year psychology class at State University. James had been struggling with his own identity, navigating the choppy waters of coming out in a small conservative town, while William seemed to glide through life with an effortless confidence that James both admired and envied. Their friendship had developed slowly, built on late-night study sessions and shared coffee runs, philosophical discussions about human nature, and heated debates about movies. William was studying to become a therapist, drawn to understanding the complexities of the human mind, while James was pursuing literature, fascinated by the stories people told themselves about their lives. James had known he was gay since he was 14, had spent years coming to terms with it, had even dated a few guys in college. But William had always been different. William was the golden boy, the one who dated beautiful women with easy smiles and perfect hair, the one who seemed to have his entire life mapped out in neat, socially acceptable lines. For 3 years, James had been content to be William's best friend, to listen to his relationship troubles, to offer advice when William's girlfriends complained that he seemed distant or emotionally unavailable. James had perfected the art of being supportive, while his own heart quietly broke a little more each time William would show up at his door, frustrated and confused about why none of his relationships felt right. It was easier to be the good friend, the reliable confidant, than to risk everything by admitting the truth that had been growing in his chest like a secret garden. James loved William Jones, had loved him probably since that first night they stayed up until 4 in the morning talking about whether people were fundamentally good or fundamentally broken. But James had learned to live with the ache, had taught himself to find satisfaction in the small intimacies of their friendship. The way William would unconsciously lean into him when they watched movies together. The way William's face would light up when James walked into a room. The way William would seek him out first when something good or bad happened in his life. It wasn't enough, but it was something, and James had convinced himself it was enough. The shift had started 3 months ago, subtle at first, like the barely perceptible change in seasons. William had broken up with his girlfriend of 8 months, Emma Johnson, a sweet psychology major who had genuinely cared about him but who had grown increasingly frustrated with what she called his emotional walls. "She's not wrong," William had said that night, sitting on James's bed with his head in his hands. "I do have walls. I just don't know why I can't let anyone in." James had wanted to say, "You let me in," but instead he had rubbed William's back and made him tea and listened to him dissect the relationship with the same analytical precision he applied to his therapy coursework. After the breakup, William had started spending even more time at James's apartment. He would show up unannounced, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with a bottle of wine, sometimes with nothing but a restless energy that seemed to fill the space between them with electricity. James began to notice things he had trained himself not to see before. The way William's gaze would linger on his face when he thought James wasn't looking. The way William would find excuses to touch him, brief brushes of fingers when passing a book, hands resting on shoulders that lingered just a moment too long. The way William would curl up next to him on the couch, closer than strictly necessary, his body warm and solid against James's side. At first, James told himself he was reading too much into it. William was going through a difficult time, questioning his relationships, his future, his ability to connect with people. It was natural that he would seek comfort from his closest friend. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday in late October, the kind of crisp autumn evening that made you want to light candles and drink hot chocolate and pretend the world was simpler than it actually was. William had shown up at James's door looking disheveled and lost, his usually perfect hair mussed and his eyes red-rimmed. "I think there's something wrong with me," William had said without preamble, pushing past James into the apartment. James had followed him to the living room, watching as William paced back and forth like a caged animal, his hands running through his hair in agitation. "What do you mean?" James had asked, settling onto the couch and watching his friend with growing concern. William had stopped pacing then, turning to face James with an expression that was equal parts vulnerability and desperation. "I went on a date tonight," William had said, "with Karen Nelson from my abnormal psychology class. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's funny. On paper, she's perfect." James had felt his stomach clench, but he had kept his expression neutral, supportive. "And," James had prompted gently, "and I spent the entire dinner thinking about how I'd rather be here with you," William had said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I kept comparing everything she said to conversations we've had, everything she did to things you do. I couldn't stop thinking about how when you laugh, really laugh, you throw your head back and your whole face lights up, and how when you're concentrating on something, you get this little furrow between your eyebrows that I want to smooth away with my thumb." James had felt his heart stop, then start again at double speed. "William," he had said carefully, "what are you saying?" William had collapsed onto the couch next to him then, close enough that James could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I'm saying I think I've been looking for you in every person I've ever dated," William had whispered. "I'm saying I think the reason none of my relationships work is because I'm already in love with someone else." The silence that followed had been deafening. James had stared at William, afraid to breathe, afraid to move, afraid that any sound or motion might shatter the moment like glass. Who, James had finally managed to ask, though he thought his heart might explode from the hope and terror warring in his chest. William had reached out then, his fingers tracing the line of James's jaw with infinite tenderness. "You," William had said simply. "It's always been you." That had been the beginning of everything and nothing all at once. Because even as William had leaned forward, even as their lips had met in a kiss that tasted like coming home and starting over simultaneously, James had known that this was just the first step in what would be a complicated journey. William was questioning everything about himself, about his sexuality, about the life he had planned. And James, who had been living with his feelings for so long, suddenly found himself in the strange position of being the more experienced one, the one who would have to be patient while William figured out who he was and what he wanted. The kiss had been soft and tentative at first, William's lips warm and slightly trembling against his own. But then James had responded, his hand coming up to cup the back of William's neck, and the kiss had deepened into something urgent and desperate and absolutely right. When they had finally broken apart, both breathing hard, William had rested his forehead against James's and whispered, "I'm scared." "Me too," James had admitted, because even though this was what he had wanted for so long, the reality of it was overwhelming. They had spent the rest of that night talking, William's head pillowed on James's chest, their fingers intertwined. William had told him about the dreams he had been having, dreams where James was more than just his friend. He had talked about the way he felt when other guys would flirt with James, a jealousy that he hadn't understood at the time, but that made perfect sense now. James had shared his own story, the years of loving William in secret, the careful balance he had maintained between hope and resignation. He had told William about the nights he had lain awake wondering what it would be like to kiss him, to hold him, to be held by him. It should have been the beginning of their love story, but instead, It had been the beginning of the most complicated 3 months of James's life. Because William, for all his emotional intelligence and psychological training, was still fundamentally terrified of what his feelings meant. The next morning, he had woken up in James's arms and panicked, pulling away with apologies and excuses about needing time to think. James had watched him leave, his heart breaking all over again. But this time the pain was sharper because now he knew what it felt like to have William choose him, even if only for one night. The weeks that followed had been a study in emotional whiplash. William would show up at James's door, seeking comfort and connection, and they would fall back into their easy intimacy. They would talk for hours, sometimes until dawn, about everything and nothing. William would curl up next to him on the couch, would let James play with his hair, would trace patterns on James's arms with his fingertips. But then morning would come, or William would remember the world outside James's apartment, and he would pull away again, retreating behind walls of confusion and fear. James understood, or at least he tried to. Coming out was different for everyone, and William was dealing with the added complexity of realizing that his entire understanding of himself had been incomplete. But understanding didn't make it hurt less when William would cancel their plans because he needed space, or when James would see him across campus talking to some girl from his program and wonder if William was trying to convince himself that his feelings for James had been a mistake. The worst part was that William wouldn't talk about it. Oh, they could discuss anything else under the sun, could analyze the motivations of fictional characters, or debate the ethics of therapeutic interventions for hours. But the moment James tried to bring up what had happened between them, what was happening between them, William would shut down, would deflect with jokes or change the subject or suddenly remember somewhere else he needed to be. James began to feel like he was living in limbo, caught between the friendship they had always had and the relationship they might have, unable to move forward or back. He started avoiding William, not because he didn't want to see him, but because being around him was becoming unbearable. Every casual touch felt loaded with meaning. Every shared glance felt like a promise that William might not be ready to keep. It was Emma Johnson, ironically, who finally forced the issue. James had been working late in the library, trying to focus on his senior thesis about queer narratives in contemporary literature, when she had approached his table. Emma was a lovely person, genuinely kind and thoughtful, and James had always felt guilty about being relieved when she and William broke up. "Can I sit?" she had asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Of course," James had said, Nisham, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. Emma had been quiet for a moment, studying his face with the same analytical intensity that William often displayed. "He's in love with you," she had said finally, her voice matter-of-fact. James had felt his cheeks burn. "I don't know what you mean." Emma had smiled sadly. "Yes, you do, and you're in love with him too." James had wanted to deny it, but something in Emma's expression had stopped him. She wasn't angry or bitter, just tired and perhaps a little relieved. "I spent 8 months wondering what was wrong with me," Emma had continued. "Why I couldn't get past his walls. Why he always seemed like he was somewhere else, even when we were together. I thought maybe I wasn't pretty enough, or smart enough, or interesting enough." "Emma," James had started, but she had held up a hand. "It took me a while to realize that it wasn't about me at all," she had said. "He was comparing me to someone else, measuring every moment we shared against some other relationship. I just didn't know it was you until I saw the way he looked at you at the psychology department party last month." James had remembered that party, remembered the way William had found him in the crowd, the way his face had lit up when their eyes met across the room. He had also remembered the way William had introduced him to people as his best friend, the careful distance he had maintained between them all evening. "You need to talk to him," Emma had said, gathering her things to leave. "Whatever is happening between you two, this limbo you're both living in isn't fair to anyone, least of all to you." She had been right, of course, but knowing what he needed to do and actually doing it were two different things. James had spent another week working up the courage to confront William. Another week of sleepless nights and distracted days, of starting text messages he never sent and practicing conversations he was too scared to have. The opportunity had finally come 3 days ago, when William had shown up at James's apartment looking more lost and confused than ever. "We need to talk," James had said, before William could even fully enter the apartment. William had frozen in the doorway, his hand still on the doorknob, his face cycling through a dozen different expressions before settling on resignation. I know, William had said quietly. I've been an ass. James had led him to the living room, to the couch that had become the site of so many important conversations between them. But instead of sitting close together as they usually did, James had deliberately chosen the opposite end, putting physical distance between them that mirrored the emotional distance William had been creating. You have been an ass, James had agreed, surprising them both with his directness. But more than that, you've been cruel. William had flinched as if James had slapped him. I never meant to hurt you, William had pretended, his voice barely above a whisper. But you did, James had replied, and the words had tasted like freedom and heartbreak all at once. You kissed me, William. You told me you loved me. And then you spent 3 months pretending it never happened. William had dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. I was scared, William had said. I am scared. Do you have any idea what it's like to realize that everything you thought you knew about yourself was wrong? James had felt a flare of anger then, hot and righteous. Do I have any idea, James had repeated, his voice rising. William, I've been gay my entire adult life. I came out when I was 16 to parents who didn't speak to me for 2 years. I've been called names, I've been threatened, I've been made to feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me just for existing. So yes, I have some idea what it's like to be scared. William had looked up then, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, William had said. You're right. I've been selfish and cowardly, and I don't deserve your patience. James had felt some of his anger deflate, replaced by the familiar ache of loving someone who couldn't love him back the way he needed to be loved. It's not about deserving, James had said more gently. It's about what you want, what you actually want, not what you think you should want, or what's easier, or what makes more sense. William had been quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I want you, William had finally said, so quietly that James almost missed it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to introduce you as my boyfriend, not my best friend. I want to stop pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than the most important thing in my life. James had felt his heart stop, then start again at double speed. But, James had prompted, because there was always a but with William. But I'm terrified that I'll mess this up, William had continued. I'm terrified that I don't know how to be in a relationship with a man. I'm terrified of what my family will say, what my professors will think, what it means for my future career. James had understood then that William's fear wasn't really about his sexuality. It was about change, about stepping into an unknown version of himself and not knowing if he would still recognize the person he became. What if we started over, James had said suddenly, the idea forming as he spoke. What if we pretended that kiss never happened, that the last 3 months never happened, and we started fresh? William had looked up at him with confusion and hope warring in his expression. What do you mean? James had taken a deep breath, feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff and without knowing if there was water below. I mean, what if you asked me out properly? What if we went on an actual date, just the two of us, and we figured out what this could be without all the baggage and fear and history weighing us down? William had stared at him for a long moment, and James had seen the exact moment when understanding dawned in his eyes. You would do that, William had asked. You would be willing to start over, knowing that I might still mess it up. James had smiled then, the first real smile he had felt in months. William, I've been waiting for you for 3 years. What's a little longer if it means we get to do this right? And that was how they had ended up here 3 days later, with William's hand on James's knee and words hanging in the air between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross but both desperately wanted to. I want to start over, William had said again, his thumb still tracing those maddening circles on James's leg. I want to ask you out properly. I want to take you to dinner and hold your hand and kiss you goodnight at your door like we're in some cheesy romantic movie. James had laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in his chest. That sounds terrible, James had said. I hate cheesy romantic movies. William had grinned then, the first genuine smile James had seen from him in weeks. Okay, what if I take you to that bookstore you love, the one with the coffee shop in the back? We can browse the poetry section and argue about whether contemporary literature is as good as the classics, And then I can buy you an overpriced latte and listen to you explain why Virginia Woolf was a genius. That sounds perfect, James had said, and meant it. William had shifted closer then, his hand moving from James's knee to his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with the same reverence James remembered from that first night. "Can I kiss you?" William had asked, and James had nodded, not trusting his voice. This kiss was different from their first, less desperate and more certain. William's lips were warm and soft against his own, and James could taste the promise of everything they might become together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William had rested his forehead against James's and smiled. "So," William had said, his voice slightly breathless, "tomorrow night, 7 o'clock." It's a date," James had agreed, and for the first time in 3 months, he had felt like they were finally moving forward instead of standing still. The next 24 hours had passed in a blur of nervous energy and cautious optimism. James had changed his outfit 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that William had once complimented. He had arrived at the bookstore 5 minutes early, partly because he was anxious and partly because he wanted to watch William's face when he walked in. William had shown up exactly on time, looking unfairly handsome in a navy blue button-down and dark slacks. But more than that, he had looked relaxed in a way that James hadn't seen in months, like some internal tension had finally released. "Hi," William had said, approaching James with a smile that made his stomach flutter. "Hi yourself," James had replied, and just like that, they had fallen into the easy rhythm that had always existed between them, but with an undercurrent of romantic possibility that made everything feel new and exciting. They had spent 2 hours wandering through the stacks, pulling books off shelves and reading passages aloud to each other, debating the merits of different authors and genres with the kind of passionate intensity that had always characterized their friendship. But now there were other layers to their interaction. William's hand brushing against James's as they reached for the same book, lingering glances when the other wasn't looking, the thrill of flirtation mixed with deep affection. When they had finally settled in the coffee shop with their drinks, William had reached across the table and taken James's hand, intertwining their fingers with a naturalness that made James's heart sing. "This is nice," William had said, his thumb stroking across James's knuckles. "It is," James had agreed, marveling at how right it felt to be sitting here with William, to be able to touch him freely, to not have to hide the way he felt. They had talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as easily as it always had between them. But there was something different now, a sense of possibility and future that hadn't been there before. William had told him about his plans for graduate school, his hopes of becoming a couples therapist, specializing in LGBTQ relationships. James had shared his dreams of teaching literature, of maybe writing a novel someday. "I want to be part of all of that," William had said suddenly, his eyes serious and intent. "Your future, your dreams, all of it. I want to be the person you come home to after a long day of teaching, the person who reads your drafts and tells you when your metaphors are getting too pretentious." James had laughed, but his eyes had been bright with tears. "My metaphors are not pretentious," James had protested. "They absolutely are," William had said with a grin. "But I love them anyway. I love you anyway." The words had hung between them, simple and profound and absolutely true. This time, William hadn't pulled back or apologized or tried to take them back. He had just sat there, holding James's hand and looking at him with an expression of such open affection that James had felt like his heart might burst from happiness. "I love you too," James had said, and it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. They had walked home slowly, taking the long way through the campus quad, their hands linked and their shoulders bumping companionably. When they reached James's apartment building, William had stopped and turned to face him, his expression suddenly nervous. "So," William had said, then his free hand coming up to cup James's cheek, "this is the part where I'm supposed to kiss you goodnight at your door, right?" James had smiled, leaning into the touch. "That's the traditional protocol." "Yes," James had said. And then William had kissed him, soft and sweet and perfect, right there under the streetlight like they were the stars of their own romantic movie. When they had finally broken apart, both smiling like idiots, William had pressed another quick kiss to James's forehead. "I'll call you tomorrow," William had said, "You better," James had replied, and had watched William walk away with a lightness in his step that James hadn't seen in months. That had been the beginning of the most wonderful 2 weeks of James's life. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, going on proper dates, but also maintaining the easy intimacy of their friendship. William had been true to his word about wanting to do things right, taking James to movies and restaurants and museums, holding his hand in public and introducing him as his boyfriend with a pride that made James's heart soar. But more than that, William had been open in a way he never had before, sharing his fears and hopes and dreams without the walls that had always existed between them. He had talked about his family, his worry about how they would react when he told them about James. He had discussed his career concerns, his fear that being openly gay might limit his opportunities in certain therapeutic settings. James had listened and offered support and advice, but more than that, he had simply been present, offering William the same steady, unconditional love that had always been there, now finally acknowledged and returned. They had been taking things slowly physically, both of them wanting to savor this new phase of their relationship. There had been kisses, sweet and passionate and perfect, and gentle touches that spoke of affection and desire in equal measure. But they hadn't rushed into anything, content to explore this new dimension of their connection at their own pace. Until tonight. Tonight, William had shown up at James's apartment with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. "I have something I want to talk to you about," William had said, as they settled onto the couch with their food. James had felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in his stomach, the old fear that William was about to pull away again, rising to the surface, despite all evidence to the contrary. "Okay," James had said carefully, setting down his chopsticks and giving William his full attention. William had taken a sip of wine, gathering his courage, before turning to face James fully. "I talked to my parents today," William had said, "about us." James had felt his heart skip a beat. They had discussed William's family several times over the past 2 weeks, his worry about their reaction, his fear of disappointing them. His parents were conservative, traditional people who had very specific ideas about what William's life should look like. "How did it go?" James had asked, though he could read the answer in William's expression. "Better than I expected, actually," William had said with a small smile. "My mom cried, but not in a bad way. She said she just wanted me to be happy, and that if you made me happy, then she wanted to meet you properly. My dad was quiet at first, but then he asked if I was sure about this, about you, and when I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life, he said that was good enough for him." James had felt tears prick at his eyes. He had been so worried about this conversation, about the possibility that William's family might reject him or try to convince William that his feelings weren't real. "They want to meet me," James had said, hardly daring to believe it. "They do," William had confirmed. "I told them about you, about how long we've been friends, about how patient and kind and amazing you are. My mom said she wants to invite us both for dinner next weekend." James had launched himself across the couch then, wrapping his arms around William's neck and kissing him with all the joy and relief and love that was bubbling up inside him. When they had finally broken apart, both laughing and breathless, William had cupped James's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. "There's something else," William had said, his voice soft and serious. "What?" James had asked, though he was pretty sure he could guess from the way William was looking at him. "I love you," William had said, the words simple and profound. "I'm in love with you, completely and totally and forever, and I don't want to wait anymore." James had felt his breath catch, understanding the implication in William's words. "Are you sure?" James had asked, because even though this was what he wanted more than anything, he needed to know that William was certain that this wasn't something he would regret in the morning. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," William had said, echoing his words from the conversation with his parents. "I want to be with you, James. Really be with you. I want to wake up next to you and know that you're mine and I'm yours." James had kissed him then, pouring all of his love and desire and gratitude into the connection between them. This kiss was different from all the others they had shared, deeper and more urgent, full of promise and possibility. When they had finally broken apart, both breathing hard, James had rested his forehead against William's and smiled. "Take me to bed," James had whispered, And William had smiled back, his eyes bright with love and desire. They had moved to James's bedroom slowly, stopping to kiss and touch and whisper endearments to each other. When William had finally laid James down on the bed, his hands gentle and reverent as he slowly undressed him, James had felt like he was living in a dream. Everything about that night had been perfect, tender and passionate and absolutely right. William had been attentive and caring, taking his time to learn James's body, to discover what made him gasp and arch and call out his name. And James had returned the favor, mapping every inch of William's skin with his hands and mouth, memorizing the taste and feel and sound of him. Afterward, they had lain tangled together, William's head on James's chest, their fingers intertwined, both of them quiet and content and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened between them. "I love you," William had murmured against James's skin, and James had tightened his arms around him, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "I love you too," James had replied, and had felt William's smile against his chest. They had fallen asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and James had woken the next morning to find William still there, still holding him, still choosing him. That had been 3 days ago, and since then, they had been living in a bubble of domestic bliss that James had never dared to imagine could be his reality. William had been staying over every night, and they had fallen into an easy routine of cooking dinner together, watching movies on the couch, talking until late into the night about everything and nothing. This morning, William had woken up before James and had surprised him with breakfast in bed, coffee made exactly the way James liked it, and toast cut into heart shapes that had made James laugh and call him ridiculously romantic. "I have a confession to make," William had said as they ate, his expression suddenly serious. James had felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it was smaller now, tempered by the security of knowing that William loved him and wasn't going anywhere. "What's that?" James had asked. "I've been planning this for weeks," William had said. "Not just the breakfast, but all of it. The conversation about starting over, the proper date, meeting my parents. I've been thinking about what you said, about doing this right, and I realized that doing it right meant being honest about what I want." "And what do you want?" James had asked, though he thought he knew the answer. William had set aside his coffee cup and taken James's hands in his expression serious and intent. "I want you to move in with me officially," William had said. "I want us to get a place together, something that's ours, not just your apartment that I happen to sleep in sometimes. I want to build a life with you, James. I want everything." James had felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what William was offering, the future he was painting for them. "Are you proposing to me?" James had asked with a shaky laugh. William had grinned, but his eyes had been serious. "Not yet," William had said, "but someday if you'll have me. I want to do this right, remember? Proper courtship, meeting the parents, moving in together, and then, when the time is right, I want to ask you to marry me." James had kissed him then, unable to find words for the joy and love that was filling his chest to bursting. "Yes," James had whispered against William's lips. "Yes to all of it. Yes to everything." And that was how they had ended up here, in this moment, with William's hand on James's knee and words of love and commitment hanging in the air between them like promises waiting to be kept. "I can't believe this is real," James said, looking into William's eyes and seeing his own wonder and joy reflected back at him. "It's real," William said, his voice soft and certain. "We're real. This is real." James felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in his chest, pure and joyful and free. "I love you, William Jones," James said, and the words felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at the same time. "I love you too, James Rivera," William replied, leaning forward to kiss him again, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both smiling like idiots, William shifted closer on the couch, eliminating the last bit of distance between them. "So," William said, his arm coming around James's shoulders, pulling him close, "what do you want to do for the rest of our lives?" James settled against William's side, marveling at how perfectly he fit there, how right it felt to be held by this man who had been his best friend and was now so much more. "Everything," James said simply. "I want to do everything with you." William pressed a kiss to the top of James's head, and James could feel him smiling. "Everything sounds perfect," William murmured, and James closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the warmth and safety and absolute rightness of this moment. Outside, the world continued to turn, full of uncertainty and change and challenge. But here, in this apartment that had witnessed the evolution of their friendship into something deeper and more beautiful, James felt like he had found his center, his home, his future. 3 months ago, he had been living in limbo, caught between love and friendship, hope and resignation. 2 weeks ago, he had been terrified that William would never be ready to choose him, to choose this life they could build together. But now, wrapped in William's arms with the taste of his kiss still on his lips and the promise of their future stretching out before them like an open road, James felt like the luckiest person alive. They had found their way to each other despite the fear and confusion and societal expectations that had tried to keep them apart. They had chosen love over safety, truth over convenience, each other over everyone and everything else. And as William held him close, murmuring plans for their future against his hair, James knew that this was just the beginning of their story, the first chapter in a love that would last the rest of their lives. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting golden light through their living room window, and James thought about how many more sunsets they would watch together, how many more moments like this they would share. "You know what the best part is," James said, tilting his head to look up at William. "What's that?" William asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on James's arm. "We get to keep being best friends too," James said. "All of this, the romance and the love and the future we're building, it's all built on the foundation of our friendship. We get to have it all." William's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face with joy. "We do get to have it all," William agreed, "and we get to have it together." James settled back against William's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling more content and complete than he ever had in his life. "Together," James repeated, and the word felt like a promise, a prayer, a perfect ending that was really just the beginning of everything they had ever dreamed of. The apartment around them was quiet except for the soft sounds of their breathing, the distant hum of traffic outside, the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantel. But to James, it sounded like home, like love, like the rest of their love is beginning right here, right now, in this perfect moment of absolute certainty and joy. William's arms tightened around him, and James smiled, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they might face, they would face them together. They had found their way to each other despite everything that had tried to keep them apart, and now nothing would ever separate them again. This was their beginning, their fresh start, their chance to do it right this time. And James knew, with the certainty that came from 3 years of friendship and 2 weeks of love, and a lifetime of possibility stretching out before them, that they were going to be extraordinary together. The golden light continued to stream through their window, painting everything in warm, hopeful hues, and James closed his eyes and let himself sink into the perfect peace of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the person he was meant to love, for exactly as long as they both shall live. 6 months later, James stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, the one they had chosen together after weeks of looking at places that felt too big or too small or just not quite right. This one had been perfect from the moment they walked in, with its large windows that let in plenty of natural light and its cozy living room that was just the right size for their couch and bookshelves. William was at the stove, making dinner and humming softly to himself, completely unconscious of the way his hips swayed slightly to the rhythm in his head. James watched him from the doorway, still sometimes amazed by the simple domestic bliss of their life together. They had settled into routines that felt both new and familiar. William would wake up first and make coffee, bringing James a cup in bed along with a kiss that tasted like morning and possibility. James would cook dinner most nights, experimenting with new recipes while William graded papers or worked on his thesis. They would eat together at their small dining table, talking about their days, their dreams, their plans for the future. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. There had been moments of adjustment, times when they had to learn how to be roommates as well as lovers, how to navigate the mundane realities of shared space and different habits. William was neater than James had expected, almost obsessively organized in a way that James found both endearing and occasionally frustrating. James was messier than William had anticipated, prone to leaving books and papers scattered around the apartment in what he called organized chaos, but William called a disaster waiting to happen. But they had figured it out, the same way they had figured out everything else in their relationship, with patience and communication and a deep, abiding love that made even the difficult conversations feel worthwhile. William's parents had indeed invited them for dinner, and the evening had gone better than either of them had dared to hope. William's mother, Joan Edwards, had welcomed James with warmth and genuine affection, asking him about his studies and his family and his plans for the future. William's father, Raymond Martinez, had been more reserved at first, but had warmed up over the course of the evening, especially when James had engaged him in a passionate discussion about baseball statistics. By the end of the night, Joan had been pressing leftovers into James's hands and extracting promises that they would visit again soon. Raymond had shaken James's hand with genuine warmth and told him that he was glad William had found someone who made him so obviously happy. James's own parents had been more complicated. His relationship with them had been strained since he came out, marked by awkward phone calls and visits that felt more like obligations than genuine connections. But when he had brought William home for the first time, something had shifted. Maybe it was seeing James so obviously happy and settled, or maybe it was William's natural charm and psychological training that helped him navigate the complex dynamics of James's family. But by the end of that weekend, James's mother, Betty Collins, had been treating William like a son, and his father, Michael Hall, had been making plans to teach William how to fish. The acceptance and support of their families had meant more to both of them than they had expected. It had made their relationship feel more real, more permanent, more like the foundation for the life they were building together. William turned from the stove then, catching sight of James in the doorway, and his face lit up with the smile that never failed to make James's heart skip a beat. "Hey you," William said, crossing the kitchen to wrap his arms around James's waist. "How was your day?" "Good," James said, leaning into William's embrace. "Better now." William kissed him softly, a greeting that had become as natural as breathing over the past 6 months. "Dinner's almost ready," William said against James's lips. "How about you open that bottle of wine we've been saving?" "The special occasion wine?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" William's smile was mysterious, tinged with excitement and nervousness in equal measure. "You'll see," William said, pressing another quick kiss to James's forehead before returning to the stove. James opened the wine, a bottle of expensive red that they had bought on their 3-month anniversary, but had never found the right moment to drink. As he poured 2 glasses, he watched William finish preparing their meal with the same attention to detail he brought to everything in his life. They ate by candlelight, the conversation flowing as easily as it always did between them. William seemed excited about something, his eyes bright with barely contained energy, but he deflected James's questions with jokes and changes of subject. It wasn't until they had finished eating and were sitting on their couch, James's head on William's shoulder, that William finally revealed what had been making him so excited all evening. "I have something for you," William said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. James's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "William," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think," William said quickly, though his smile suggested it was something wonderful nonetheless. "I mean, it's not what you think, but it's not exactly what you think either." James stared at the box, his mind racing with possibilities and hopes and fears all tangled together. "Open it," William said gently, placing the box in James's trembling hands. Inside was a simple silver ring, elegant and understated, with an inscription on the inside that read "Always and Forever." "It's a promise ring," William said, his voice soft and serious. "A promise that someday, when we're both ready, when we've built the life we want together, I'm going to ask you to marry me properly. But until then, I want you to know that you're it for me, James. You're my person, my future, my everything." James felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked at the ring, then at William's face, seeing all the love and commitment and hope for their future reflected in his expression. "Will you wear it?" William asked, and James could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the fear that maybe this was too much too soon. "Yes," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course I'll wear it." William took the ring from the box with shaking hands and slipped it onto James's finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made just for him. "I love you," William said, bringing James's hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to the ring. "I love you too," James replied, and then he was kissing William, pouring all of his joy and gratitude and overwhelming love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James looked down at the ring on his finger, marveling at how right it felt, how complete it made him feel. You know, James said, his voice still shaky with emotion, 6 months ago I thought I had lost you forever. I thought you were too scared to choose this, to choose us. William cupped James's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I was scared, William admitted. Terrified, actually. But you know what scared me more than anything else? What? James asked. The thought of living my whole life without you, William said. The thought of being too much of a coward to fight for the best thing that ever happened to me. James kissed him again, soft and sweet and full of promise. I'm so glad you fought for us, James whispered against William's lips. Me too, William replied. And I'm going to keep fighting for us every single day for the rest of our lives. They spent the rest of the evening curled up together on their couch, talking about their future, their dreams, their plans. William told him about the job offer he had received from a progressive therapy practice that specialized in LGBTQ counseling. James shared his excitement about the teaching position he had been offered at a local high school, working with at-risk kids who needed someone to believe in them. Everything was falling into place, their life together taking shape in ways that felt both planned and wonderfully spontaneous. They were building something beautiful together, something that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision for the future. As the night grew later, they moved to their bedroom, making love with a tenderness and passion that spoke of deep commitment and abiding love. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, William traced lazy patterns on James's chest while James played with his hair. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't figured this out? William asked quietly. James was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Sometimes, James said, but then I remember that we did figure it out. We found our way to each other despite everything that tried to keep us apart. And that feels like the most important thing. William pressed a kiss to James's chest, right over his heart. I used to think that love was supposed to be easy, William said, that if it was right, it wouldn't require any work or courage or sacrifice. And now, James prompted gently, now I know that the best love, the kind that lasts, requires all of those things and more, William said. It requires showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again, even when it's scary or difficult or uncertain. James tightened his arms around William, holding him close. I choose you, James said simply. Today, tomorrow, always. I choose you. And I choose you, William replied, and James could hear the smile in his voice. Always and forever. James looked down at the ring on his finger, catching the faint glimmer of silver in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, everything they had overcome, everything they hoped to become. 6 months ago, he had been living in limbo, caught between love and friendship, hope and resignation. Now he was engaged to be engaged to the love of his life, building a future that exceeded his wildest dreams. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of uncertainty, every difficult conversation, every leap of faith. They had learned to communicate openly and honestly, to support each other's dreams and fears, to create a relationship that honored both their individual identities and their shared commitment. As William's breathing evened out beside him, James thought about all the adventures that lay ahead of them. Graduate school and new careers, meeting each other's extended families, traveling together, maybe buying a house someday, possibly even children if they decided they wanted them. But more than any specific milestone or achievement, James was excited about the simple prospect of growing old with William, of waking up next to him every morning for the rest of their lives, of being his partner in all the big moments and small daily joys that would make up their shared existence. The promise ring on his finger felt warm against his skin, a constant reminder of William's love and commitment. Someday, probably sooner than later given William's romantic nature, it would be replaced with a proper engagement ring and then a wedding band. But even then, James thought he might keep this ring, this symbol of the moment when their future together became real and tangible and absolutely certain. He pressed a soft kiss to the top of William's head and closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the perfect peace of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the person he was meant to love, for exactly as long as they both shall live. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to choose each other and build their life together. But tonight, wrapped in William's arms with the promise of forever gleaming on his finger, James felt like the luckiest person alive. 1 year later, James stood at the altar of the small chapel where they had decided to hold their wedding, watching as William walked down the aisle toward him. William looked breathtaking in his dark blue suit, his face radiant with joy and love, and the kind of happiness that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. The past year had been a whirlwind of wedding planning and career changes, of growing closer as a couple while also maintaining their individual identities and dreams. William had started his new job at the therapy practice and was thriving, helping other LGBTQ individuals and couples navigate their own journeys of self-discovery and acceptance. James had begun teaching and had quickly discovered that he had a gift for connecting with students who felt like outsiders, helping them find their voices through literature and writing. They had moved into a larger apartment to accommodate William's home office and James's ever-growing collection of books. They had adopted a cat, a orange tabby they had named Fitzgerald, who had quickly become the spoiled center of their domestic universe. They had traveled together, visited each other's families, hosted dinner parties for their friends, and slowly built the life they had dreamed of during those early conversations on their couch. The proposal had come on a random Tuesday evening in March as they were cooking dinner together in their kitchen. James had been chopping vegetables while William stirred sauce on the stove, both of them humming along to the music playing from their speakers, when William had suddenly turned off the burner and gotten down on one knee right there between the refrigerator and the counter. James Rivera, William had said, his voice shaking with emotion and excitement, "Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me?" The ring had been beautiful, a simple platinum band with a small diamond that caught the light from their kitchen window. But more beautiful than the ring had been the expression on William's face, the absolute certainty and joy and love that had transformed his features into something radiant. "Yes," James had said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." They had called their families that night, sharing their joy with parents and siblings who had become their biggest supporters and cheerleaders. Joan Edwards had cried happy tears and immediately started planning engagement parties and wedding showers. Betty Collins had demanded to know every detail about the proposal and the ring and their plans for the ceremony. The wedding planning had been surprisingly easy, mainly because they had both known exactly what they wanted from the beginning. A small ceremony with just their closest family and friends, held in the chapel where William's grandparents had been married 50 years earlier. A reception in the fellowship hall with dancing and cake, and toasts that would probably make everyone cry. They had written their own vows, spending weeks crafting words that would capture the depth of their love and commitment. James had filled pages with drafts, trying to find a way to express how William had changed his life, how loving him had taught James what it meant to be truly known and accepted and cherished. Now, as William reached the altar and took his place beside James, both of them grinning like idiots despite their attempts to maintain some semblance of dignity, James felt his heart overflow with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The ceremony was beautiful and meaningful, filled with laughter and tears and moments of such profound joy that James felt like his heart might burst from happiness. When the minister pronounced them married and told them they could kiss, William cupped James's face in his hands and kissed him with such tenderness and passion that the small congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was everything they had hoped for and more. Their families mingled easily, bonded by their shared love for the couple and their joy in celebrating this milestone. Their friends gave speeches that were funny and heartfelt, sharing stories about James and William's relationship that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. But the best moment of the entire day came during their first dance, when William held James close and whispered in his ear, "We did it. We actually did it." "What? Getting married?" James had whispered back, swaying to the music with the man who was now his husband. "No," William had said, pulling back to look into James's eyes. "We built the life we dreamed about. We became the people we wanted to be. We chose love over fear and each other over everything else." James had kissed him then, right there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring that everyone was watching and taking pictures. Because William was right, they had done it. They had taken the friendship that had sustained them through college and transformed it into a love story that would last the rest of their lives. As they continued to dance, surrounded by the people who loved them most, James thought about the scared young man he had been just 2 years ago, convinced that his feelings for William would always be unrequited, that he would have to be content with friendship and nothing more. That version of himself felt like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. The James who existed today was confident and secure in his love, certain of his place in William's life and their shared future. He was a husband, a teacher, a man who had learned to fight for what he wanted and to believe that he deserved happiness. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but gradually through countless conversations and small moments of courage, and the steady, unwavering love of the man now spinning him around their makeshift dance floor. William had taught him what it meant to be truly seen and accepted, flaws and all. Their relationship had shown him that love didn't have to be perfect to be real, that the best partnerships were built on friendship and respect and the willingness to grow together. As the song ended and they were surrounded by their guests offering congratulations and well wishes, James caught William's eye across the crowd and smiled. His husband, he thought, marveling at how natural the word felt. William was his husband now, his partner for life, his person in every sense of the word. Later, after the last guest had gone home and they had changed out of their wedding clothes, they sat on the couch in their hotel room, still wearing their wedding rings and sharing a bottle of champagne left over from the reception. "So, Mr. Jones," William said, using James's new married name with obvious delight, "how does it feel to be officially stuck with me for the rest of your life?" James laughed, settling against William's side in the position that had become as natural as breathing over the past year and a half. "Like the greatest adventure I've ever embarked on," James said, and meant every word. They talked long into the night about their honeymoon plans, their hopes for their first year of marriage, their dreams for the decades to come. William wanted to eventually start his own practice, specializing in helping LGBTQ youth and their families navigate the coming out process. James was considering going back to school for his master's degree in education, maybe even pursuing a doctorate someday so he could train other teachers. But more than any professional ambitions, they were excited about the simple prospect of building a life together, of creating traditions and memories in a home that reflected both of their personalities and dreams. They talked about buying a house with a big backyard for Fitzgerald and maybe a dog someday. They discussed travel plans and retirement goals and whether they wanted to have children through adoption or surrogacy. Everything felt possible now, every dream within reach because they would be pursuing it together. The future stretched out before them like an open road, full of potential and promise, and the absolute certainty that whatever challenges they might face, they would face them as a team. As the night grew later and they finally made their way to bed, James thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first night in college when they had stayed up talking until dawn, to the months of confusion and fear and uncertainty, to the moment when William had finally found the courage to choose love over safety. Every step had been necessary. Every difficult conversation and moment of doubt had led them closer to this perfect ending that was really just the beginning of their greatest adventure together. They had learned to communicate openly and honestly, to support each other's dreams and fears, to create a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding, and a love so deep it had transformed them both. Now, as they settled into bed as husbands for the first time, William's arms around James and their wedding rings catching the moonlight streaming through the hotel window, James felt a peace and contentment he had never imagined possible. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not the dramatic, overwhelming emotion he had expected, but this quiet, steady certainty that he was exactly where he belonged with exactly the right person. It was the security of knowing that William would be there when he woke up, not just tomorrow, but every tomorrow for the rest of their lives. "I love you," James whispered into the darkness, and felt William's arms tighten around him. "I love you too," William replied, his voice soft and content. Always and forever," James agreed, and closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the perfect peace of being married to his best friend, his greatest love, his partner in all the adventures yet to come. Outside their hotel window, the world continued to turn, full of uncertainty and change and challenge. But here in this bed where they would spend their first night as husbands, James felt like he had found his center, his home, his happily ever after. They had started as friends, had navigated the complicated transition to lovers, and had now committed to spending the rest of their lives as partners in every sense of the word. It was the kind of love story that restored faith in the possibility of finding your person, your soulmate, your other half. And as sleep finally claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms with the promise of forever gleaming on their fingers, James smiled, knowing that their story was far from over. This was just the end of the beginning, the completion of their origin story, and the start of the epic adventure that would be their marriage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to choose each other and build their life together. But tonight, on their wedding night, surrounded by love and possibility and the absolute certainty of their commitment to each other, James and William Jones fell asleep as husbands, as partners, as two people who had found in each other everything they had ever been searching for. The ring on James's finger felt warm against his skin, a constant reminder of the promises they had made and the love they shared. Someday, years from now, he would tell their story to their children or grandchildren, would share the tale of how two best friends had found the courage to become something more, had chosen love over fear and each other over everyone and everything else. But for now, it was enough to simply be here, in this moment, married to the love of his life and ready to begin the greatest adventure of all, the adventure of growing old together, of building a life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision for the future. They had done it. They had taken their friendship and transformed it into a love story for the ages. And as the first night of their marriage gave way to dawn, James knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of their happily ever after.